We have all heard of the story of the Hatfields and McCoys, and it isn't remembered because it's a heartwarming, inspiring story. We've heard of it because there are perhaps few other stories that are filled with more vitriol and hatred than the feud between these two families. And what is all the more sad is that this whole thing, a lot of people don't know this, but this whole thing started over a pig that each family claimed was theirs and led to the death of a Hatfield family member. Yeah, the feud started in 1878 and went into the early 1900s. And, we might laugh at this and we might think, how weird is that two families could become such bitter enemies and it all started over a pig? But the fact is that we can make enemies of others over less things. Maybe it's a cold shoulder or a glance or a simple word that makes a person our enemy. Enemies are a topic that comes up over and over again in the New Testament. Jesus himself dealt with the topic on several occasions, and he instructed us to love our enemies and to pray for them. What a revolutionary concept. Even all these years later, right? But as we come to Revelation chapters 19 and 20, we see that the enemies of God's people are destroyed. And that doesn't seem very loving, does it? Why would God do such a thing? Maybe God isn't so loving after all, right? Well, we have to remember that just like any chapter in the Bible, we have to look at the entire context. Over and over again, God has given the world chances to return to Him, and many of them choose not to. He sent His Son to die on the cross for their sins. He's blessed them with all these many things, and He has warned them over and again, and yet they wouldn't listen. Also, what makes this whole thing different is that God is a righteous judge, and He knows what is in every heart and mind. He can judge and destroy because He knows all the facts. And yet somehow we create enemies without all the information. In essence, making ourselves the judge, jury, and yes, maybe even the executioner of people. Well, contrasting with God's victory over the enemies of His people is the great celebration of heaven. It's a wedding feast. Now, at first, this might seem a little bit strange, right? It's a strange image to, right here in the midst of all that's in this book, to have this wedding feast. But it's really not that strange. It makes total sense. Because not only has God overcome His enemies and delivered His people, the church, but now they are united with their Savior. It's husband Jesus Christ. It really is an amazing image to see the warrior Jesus coming into this ceremony to be wed and then to head off to battle and to fight for the bride that He loves. Even Hollywood can't come up with a better scene than that. And this warrior Jesus goes off to battle and he wins a one-sided affair over those who have stood against God and yes, even over Satan himself. But there's one more enemy. The one we all long to be defeated. The one that none of us can escape. Death itself. Jesus, though, He conquers death. And everyone is judged, it says. Now, being judged is a nice idea to think of because we all know that it's God that's judging. And you know what? We're not going to look very good, but God knows our hearts and our minds, and He knows who we belong to. And the difference in this judging is that some who are judged have the greatest attorney ever. Yes, the one who died for his clients and pleads our case before God. Those who know Jesus are judged differently through the purity and sacrifice of Jesus Himself. Will we mourn over our sin that day in judgment? Absolutely. But will it be overshadowed by the joy of knowing Jesus Christ totally? But that leaves us with something that should make us a little bit uncomfortable. What about those who don't know Jesus? What about those people who stand against God and His church? Those you might consider as our enemies? Should we start hating them now? Should we get ahead of God and begin to condemn them? Well, notice that the only one in these chapters who is judging is God Himself. It's not our job to send people either to heaven or hell. We should be pointing them to Jesus. And when we have that in mind, our enemies should be loved so much that maybe they even become our friends. There is no better feeling than becoming a friend with someone who was once an enemy. And that is the challenge that's before us. And that's what you're going to discuss here today as you go through your time in your group.